EDI questions, and I want to also take a decent amount of time to talk through our upcoming EDI release. So like always, I went ahead and muted everybody, disabled video just so we can save on bandwidth. Questions, if you could possibly put them in the chat, they would be great. I will be monitoring those throughout. And then I also will be recording this answer hour session today. So with that, we'll go ahead and just get right into the deck. So here's just a really quick agenda. As I mentioned, I'm going to spend most of the time talking through our EDI release. You all likely received an email that was outlining this information. I just want to make sure that everybody is clear on how specific functions are going to work. I know we have some changes that are absolutely going to impact everybody in this group. So just wanted to kind of talk through that. We'll also do some Q&A, and then we'll just kind of gauge the need for some upcoming answer hour sessions related to EDI. Hopping right into the release, one thing I did want to touch on prior to going into the release information, I know a number of you reached out. We did have some processing delays, and then starting January 9th through yesterday. Those files should have been processed, so you should be able to submit that information, or not submit that information. You should be able to see those acknowledgements on your end now. If you are still missing an acknowledgement for some reason, please reach out to our EDI team, and they can take a look and see if something else is going on. So getting into the release content, so this can be found on our Campus Central page, and as I mentioned, we also have this sent out in a Gov Delivery Bulletin. So essentially, what our objective is with this EDI release, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit to make this a little easier for everyone to read. We really wanted to try and resolve some of the larger issues that people have been experiencing with EDI transactions. So just to kind of go through all of these different updates that we have, we are looking at theme validation rules. So right now we have some limits based on the IRS theme limitations. We are going to loosen those up a little bit just because we do have some sole proprietors who might be using their SSN or something else for their theme. A really large one that I know a lot of you have been experiencing is the 5XX benefit handling, specifically on PUI transactions. So a lot of you all are attempting to let us know that you're paying a settlement in most situations, and it's failing because you don't have that maintenance type code in the benefit segment. So this is actually just going to take care of that. It shouldn't be required any further. We updated some of our sequencing for SU transactions, so just kind of opens that up a little bit. Just a reminder that those transactions are still not going to be, they won't TA unless you've already contacted us and we've given approval and flagged that claim to accept an SU transaction. So even though we're updating the sequencing for these, it's still going to require prior authorization from DLI. So just make sure that if you need to send an SU, or if you think it's a situation where you're reaching out to us ahead of time so that you don't get a rejection on that. We did have an issue with duplicate EDI transactions within the same batch as well. In some instances, people are sending maybe 2 instances of an IP for the same claim as far as like the JCN and WID. In some instances, that was causing the entire batch to fail. We've put in some logic that is not going to cause that failure anymore. Date of birth projections in Campus. We do have some records where the date of birth wasn't populated for some reason or didn't migrate for some reason. So in those instances, a lot of you all are getting rejections and have to contact us, and we'll manually update the date of birth. That should no longer occur after this EDI release. This one is actually internal functionality, so I'm going to skip over that one and just go through a few more of these. The additional EDI sequencing updates, that one's pretty self-explanatory, just kind of opening up some sequencing for UIs and PYs. granting claim access to adjusters. I'm going to come back to this one because I know there were a lot of questions about this in our group management answer hour yesterday. Some additional sequencing updates. So I know a lot of you, especially OTs and NTs, are failing, or so transactions after OTs or NTs are failing when benefits aren't present. We're working to fix that as well. Claim administrator party updates for UR transactions. We currently do not update those on UR transactions, but we will begin doing that. Another really big one was DN 297. So that is the first day of disability after the waiting period. We currently have an edit saying that that can't be greater than the maintenance type code date. We went ahead and we removed that edit. So essentially that date can now be a future date. We understand that a lot of you may already know that somebody's going to be out of the office for 2 weeks. When you get that, it may only be the second day of the waiting period and you want to send it to us. That's the reason that we removed that edit. I won't go through all these error message updates, but essentially our objective here was to take some of the more confusing error messages and fix those. So we are just giving you guys a little bit more of a clear explanation. And just going back to this granting claim access to the adjuster by matching on the claim adjuster email address. What this will do is it will add or update adjuster information based on what is being sent in the EDI transaction for the adjuster email address. So if that adjuster email address is also in either the insurer or the claim administrator group that is part of that particular claim, if everything matches up, it'll assign that adjuster and give them access to that claim. So you won't need to manually reassign those unless for some reason you would like to anymore. So I've gotten a lot of questions about this and if it would be retroactive. So the answer with that is it will not be retroactive. However, it can be updated by filing a 402 or an NT or even just on your next SHORI transaction. So while it won't be retroactive, we were a little concerned with some data clashing. If we were to make it retroactive, it will be adjusted the first time you take any kind of action on that claim in the future. So I see quite a few questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and hop back into my slides and I will start running through those questions. All right. There's a question here about salary continuation. So salary continued in lieu of compensation indicator does not trigger a SHROI EP directly in Minnesota. That indicator is only used in Pennsylvania. In order to trigger a SHROI EP in Minnesota, you must report 2XX benefits, SHROI EP rule. To trigger a SHROI EP report in states other than PA, only 2XX benefits must be reported. If so, where do we report 2XX benefit and what is this based on? So that specific benefit that you should be reporting in that instance is the temporary total paid by employer. So it's 250. You should be reporting that in the benefit segment just like you would for an IP. The main difference is that you wouldn't submit a payment segment on the EP since you're not making a direct payment. And then you would also not need to include a benefit payment issue date because you're not issuing a benefit. So you would still report that benefit segment just like you would if you were paying TTD. It's just that you would use that other benefit type code and you would omit the other things that I mentioned. You would not need to enter those in order for it to be valid. All right. And just to follow up on that, I think the question also was wondering what needed to be reported. So in that instance, you would report what you would have paid for TTD in that instance, had the wage continuation not superseded those TTD benefits. All right, next. So we tried to file an RB after filing a SHROI UR on an old 2018 claim with other forms paid prior to 11/2, TPD had previously been paid, but there was a new period of TPD. I tried to enter that, but we got an error message that the payment start date must be the same as the benefit start date. The benefit start date was in 2018. That has nothing to do with the current need to reinstate the benefit. How does this get resolved with no IP or PY form because of the old claim? Meredith, you can send a message to the EDI team with that specific error that you're seeing and the jurisdiction claim number. We can take a look at that one and see exactly why that's occurring. All right, this next one is a Shuri PD question. Partial denial of indemnity from the start of the claim, but accepting medical per the event table. We are unable to file the PD until after the timely payment. The problem, the timely medical payment could take 30+ days from DLI. Thus, the carrier is unable to file their claim position. I don't believe we have any requirement in the PD that you have to make a medical payment. We actually don't even accept the codes for medical payments. So you should be able to just submit your Shore PD at that point. If you want, you can send an example of what you're seeing in the benefits or in the event table, but that is not anything that we would have to our knowledge. I don't know if Melissa or John is on. Does that sound familiar to either of you?
Angela, this is Sandy. I'm the one who asked the question. And on your event table line, row 32 clearly states the trigger value, partial denial of either indemnity or medical, but not both, any time after initial payment. So I guess my question is, when the rep is denying either indemnity or medical right from the start of the claim, we're not allowed, let me rephrase that. I'm not finding a partial denial scenario that allows us to notify the state that our position is we are denying indemnity but picking up medical. Because clearly in here, the three scenarios for partial denial are after timely initial payment, or after the report of TPD, or after the person has returned to work. Those are the three scenarios for partial denial. So I'm just seeking a little direction as to, from a carrier perspective and adjuster perspective, how are we supposed to notify the state that we are denying the indemnity, but we are going to pick up the medical? Does that, I hope that helps a little.
Yeah, so in that instance, and Melissa or John, if you want to speak to this a little further, typically in Minnesota, we're not concerned with medical. I believe you should be able to still file your PD indicating that you're denying indemnity in whole or medical in part. It may be that we don't accept all of those codes, but it's typically because we would consider something like that a full denial of indemnity benefits. I don't know if someone from compliance wants to jump in and explain what you guys would expect in that situation.
This is John. I can maybe add a little bit to it. I guess it depends upon what we're talking about. If your own internal triggers are not allowing you to send the PD, what we were trying to open up, I think, is instances where you maybe have to respond to a dispute or something and you need to send that PD. The partial denial codes are really not what was ever important to DLI. It's more the narrative. So if you're able to trigger the PD in a situation where you think it applies, then I believe we should be accepting any of those, and it's really the narrative that's on the PD that matters. Does that kind of cover it, Sandy?
Yes and no, and I guess maybe that goes a little bit to the issue then that our vendor and what our vendor has put in place, because our vendor is programming per your event table. So our vendor is looking at, we're trying to file a PD because, again, they're claiming indemnity and medical. Our position is we're denying indemnity, but accepting medical, but there's been no payments yet. And the way the event table is written, I can see where our vendor is interpreting the fact that, yeah, a PD would not generate because we've not generated any other payments, or we've not generated any payments at this point in time. So we're kind of in a catch-22. You know, I know this then turns the claim into the claim type code medical, but the claimant is alleging the claim type code of indemnity. They're claiming indemnity benefits. We're just taking the position of denying it. So are we better off doing a full denial or a partial? I think we're kind of caught in a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, Sandy, if you could just send an email to the EDI team and copy myself with that information. I just want to be respectful of everyone's time here and figure out exactly what would typically occur in that situation. We can take a look at our EDI documentation as well and kind of figure out where the discrepancies are there, or the confusion. I've not heard anything from others, so I just want to make sure that everything is kind of on the
I appreciate that. I will follow up with that. Thank you.
I think maybe one thing, Angie, too, we could add for the whole group, and this goes to the event table and how I know vendors are trying to help everyone out in programming your systems so that they send to exactly fit the event table. The thinking behind our event table, and it should probably be updated, but was that these are the things that you kind of legally really, they fit into a very prescribed reason to send transactions to the state. It doesn't preclude other transactions, and I think that's what some vendors are doing, is they're saying, these are the only criteria that you can send a transaction to Minnesota. If I were to make one suggestion to all senders, is if you have the ability to override that, to send us a transaction whenever you think is appropriate. That would probably be best, because as we all know, work comp is pretty complicated, and to purely program can be challenging. And so there are more instances like this scenario where you may have to send transactions to Minnesota that don't necessarily fit on the few rows we have on the event table.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. We can take a look at that, and we can make sure that that is addressed too, or that we put some information in our next newsletter surrounding that as well. So a few other comments and questions. The PY form returned from campus states that the benefit amounts include attorney's fees. However, we were told to put in only what was paid and not include what we have withheld. I'm having a little bit of trouble with that one. Meredith, if you could send an example of what you mean, it may just be something that needs to be updated on that form. This next one, surrounding the NOID. So there used to be an old NOID form for death. How do we file or notify of the death? It is unknown if the death was a result of the work injury. I didn't see anything specific regarding the death in the discontinuance form in campus. I filed the suspension with the death reason to EVIX, and this was accepted, but no form was generated as the employee did not actually return to work. I filed the discontinuance directly in campus, but the form that generated doesn't have any information regarding death except for the wording I supplied. Is this the correct way to file, or do we need to file both the discontinuance and the EDI suspension? I'm actually going to have compliance weigh in on this as well, but I believe that you would want to do both of those in that instance. So, Bridget, I believe you did it how it was intended, where you would specify in your narrative. John, do you have anything additional to add to that?
Yeah, that sounds right, Angie. It sort of depends upon the more minute facts, but yeah, you might be doing a suspension and or an update to tell us all that information.
Thanks, John. Payment information. Do we delete old payments to enter new? For example, prior PY for employee payments and now fees awarded, so doing new PY. So in that instance, I think you're wanting to know if you need to delete old payments out of your vendor's website when you submit your PY. I believe the answer would be yes in that instance. We would only want to know what is true for that transaction, but your benefits should be including everything. So just to make sure that the distinction is made between payments and benefits, benefits you would not remove, but payments you would only send what's true for that transaction. A SUR UR was done and accepted, and a SUR UR was done and accepted. We went to file the FN and realized we forgot to provide PPD benefit information that was paid prior to the conversion. How can I correct the SUR UR? Can I do a SUR 02? John, I may need your help on this one. Do you remember, is the SUR 02 available after the FN? Bridget, if you haven't filed the FN yet, I would recommend doing that SUR 02. And you should be able to update the benefits.
I think I might pass edits, but you might have to send us an email and ask for the SU to be opened up. If it's a benefit that's never been introduced in the past, and it should have come in on the SUR UR, but it did not, then we'll probably have to do the SU to get it introduced correctly. You may be able to get through another transaction, but you probably don't want to. You probably want the SU.
Great, thank you, John. When reporting via our vendor, when we enter the number of weeks and the days for the benefits paid for the days part, is it weekdays only or including weekends for Minnesota? If TTD was paid from 1/1 to 1/11, do you indicate 1 week and 2 days, or do you indicate 1 week and 4 days, including the weekend days? So that's going to depend on the employee's work schedule. Typically in Minnesota, we go with a 5-day work week. So if it was a situation where you paid the whole week, Monday through Friday, and then you paid Monday and Tuesday, that would be considered 1 week, 2 days. It's all going to depend on their typical work schedule. Great. Next question. I submitted an IP that was accepted. I realized I entered the incorrect claim information. How can this be fixed? Can you delete the accepted IP and redo it? If I do this, will a corrected form be generated? So I've covered this in the past. I believe in that instance, you would need to submit a SUR 02 depending on what was incorrect. We don't have a cancel for an IP. You wouldn't be able to just cancel that transaction. Unfortunately, a new form wouldn't necessarily trigger because those O2s are not specific to the transaction. So when you are sending an O2, you're sending it to update all the claim information, not specifically one maintenance type code. So in that instance, I would recommend doing the O2 depending on the information that was incorrect, but unfortunately it wouldn't generate a corrected form. What do you do when you are paying ongoing TTD benefits per a settlement agreement and an award on TTD ends as of the day of the settlement? Do we just file an SX and do not indicate the actual return to work date? Will Dolly be expecting a discontinuance filed directly in campus? I might need some assistance with Melissa, or from Melissa and John on this one as well. I believe in that instance, it's essentially that you're cutting off the benefits as of the date of settlement. I think you would want to do a suspension and then possibly a PY with that award information, but I will defer to compliance since they're the ones who review those actual settlements.
I think you're right, Angie. I think if it's just the suspension of regularly scheduled benefits, it's just the SX. If there was a lump sum of something, then a PY could be sent to represent that. But otherwise, it's kind of down to the minutia of what that award order was, whether or not you would do both or just one.
Thanks, John. The next one, when filing a PY, the lump sum payment and settlement codes, what do the different options mean? What is the difference between settlement full, agreement stipulated, and award? So I believe that those are mostly going to depend on what is in your settlement or why you're paying that lump sum. So if it's a situation where it's a full, final, complete, you would likely want to use the settlement full. If it's a situation where something is being awarded, like maybe a 239, it would make the most sense to do an award. If it's just a lump sum, if you're not having to reinstate, if you're just paying a lump sum. An agreement stipulated, I think, would cover more of like your to-date settlements or your partial settlements rather than your full final complete. As far as those options, I know we have a requirement for those, but most importantly, we're going to be looking for those benefits. We're going to be looking for the date that you paid, and we're also going to be looking for the award order date and matching it up to the stipulation that we receive on our end. So I wouldn't get too caught up in those settlement codes. I don't believe we have any edit logic requiring it to be a specific value outside of those valid values. But in my mind, those would be the most logical paths. As I mentioned, just make sure that you're including that other pertinent information. John, do you have anything to add on that? Or does that sound correct?
Yeah, oh, you're absolutely right, Angie. And we just appreciate if you guys did your best job to try and make them fit into what you think it is, especially if there's a stip or a judge who's decreed something, and just not default them all to NS. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. When is the EDI released? I believe that is the last week of January. I will get the exact date for when that is planned to go out into the production environment. Right now, what I have are the test dates, so I apologize. I don't want to provide any incorrect information for the actual release date. So I will verify that and we can send out a communication. All right, next question. I was filing a PY and tried to show in the payments the employee legal expenses that were paid, costs and disbursements / RORAF. It rejected, indicating that code 340 is not valid. Is this correct? How do we report employee legal expenses? I believe that's a defect, and I believe that I actually logged that a little while ago because it was accepting for the other benefit type, but for some reason not the payment. I will double check on that one, but I believe that would be the correct way to report those. I just know that right now that code for some reason is not accepting in the payment segment. Where do we obtain the date of birth? Is it from a previously filed claim? So it can be from a number of sources. It could be from a previously filed claim. I believe we may also, Melissa, you may need to correct me if I'm wrong. I think we may get the DOB from some databases as well. I know we have some sources where we review it and kind of pull that information, but for the most part, I believe that they are just from old dates of injury if that employee already has a presence in campus. Will there be a fix for SA rejections of invalid sequencing after an SX has TA'd? I believe that there will. I'm going to go ahead and just get back to verify that. Yeah, so I believe that we're opening up the sequencing for SAs. So basically, I think it's anything within 00AU, AQUI, or 4UR. We can get some additional information on that and kind of elaborate a little bit more. When will the updated tables reflecting changes in the pending development be published? I'm not sure on the publish date quite yet. Right now, we're just kind of focused on getting that code into the system, but I would assume that we will get those published likely in late January or early February. It's just going to depend on the capacity as we are working through the code. Can you explain further when we should enter Shroy URs and when one would no longer be accepted? In just a moment here, I'm going to go ahead and get to the actual page that does talk through all of that. So we have a FAQ, and this specifically outlines when Shroy URs would be applicable. I'm going to put that in the chat. just a moment here. So number 7 is the one that deals with URs. Essentially, for sure URs, what we're going to be looking for is whether or not you completed a notice of benefit payment or some sort of equivalent to that prior to go live. So if you didn't do an NOPLD, I apologize, I think I meant a notice of benefit payment. I meant NOPLD. If you did not do an NOPLD prior to the campus rollout, but you did submit your FROI 00 and it accepted, then you would just go ahead and go right into your normal SHROI sequencing. In a situation where you submitted your NOPLD, you submitted your FROI, that's when you'd want to do your FROI UR. You should only ever do one, or I apologize, SHROI UR. You would only ever want to do one SHROI UR on a claim. So let's say in that instance that I was talking about, let's say we had a date of injury of 9/25. The first report of injury was reported on 9/27. So prior to campus, NOPLD was sent on 9/30. So we've got all of those things established. Now in campus, what you're going to want to do, file that FROI UR, you're going to want to file a SHROI UR, and then that should open it up for whatever needs to come next. So let's say I had my 00, I did my NOPLD showing that I was initiating benefits, and now in January, I need to file my NOID equivalent. I would go FROI UR, SHROI UR, suspension transaction, so SX, full suspension. Hopefully that helps a little bit. And I don't think, as far as when would one no longer be accepted, I don't think we have a time frame for not accepting those. It's just that they would not be accepted if it's not applicable to the situation or if one was already filed and accepted. Should the OBT 340 transactions appear in OBTs and payments on the PY, or should 340 only be sent as an OBT without a matching payment? So typically you're going to send it with a matching payment if it's part of a settlement. You don't have to include a payment, but you would typically want to send it with a payment segment if you're sending it on a PY transaction. If you're sending it on a different transaction, you would not include a payment unless it was an IP for some reason. Most of the time you wouldn't include a payment segment on those other maintenance type codes.
So can I ask a quick follow-up question on that? If 340 is currently getting rejected, then how is it being handled? I mean, are we just not supposed to send it now while it's being rejected, or is there a plan to get it fixed so that these PYs can be submitted? Should we hold the PYs until it's fixed?
No, I would recommend filing them. If it's failing due to that payment segment, that's something that we'll fix because it is a valid value on our tables. I'm just not sure when it would be resolved. I should probably defer to compliance for this just to make sure that they would be okay with that. Melissa and or John, would it be something that you would want the claim administrator to just exclude the payment segment in those instances so that they can get the NOBP in timely or the PY in timely for just those attorney fees?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, Angie. Don't hold up your PY, everyone, because of a 340 and they can't get into the payment segment. It can just come in as the OBT. You just won't see any payees until that bug is fixed, as Angie said. It's more important to get that PY than it is to know that someone got the RORAF fees or whatever. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Any update on when penalties will be reinstated? So I did take that request offline and asked, forwarded it over to some other people. I apologize, I don't have the authority to talk through that, but I did, after our group admin answer hour, send that to some of the appropriate parties. So hopefully there will be some communication sent out on that shortly. Suppose a CB was accepted with 050 and 070, and following a suspension accepted carrying only 050, then the following FN is getting rejected for no match on sweep segment, as is carrying both 050 and 070. Do we need to file a SHROI 02 in this case, or should we file an RB before the FN? So in that instance, if you essentially eliminated a benefit on your suspension, I believe we would probably have to go the SU route, because we would need to get that sweep benefit back into the transaction. In this instance, the reason that your FN is rejecting is because it thinks that you're trying to introduce a new benefit because it's comparing to your last transaction with benefits. So in that instance, I think it would be worth contacting us, and we could open up the SU if we couldn't find an alternative solution. And Carolyn, I think that answers your question as well. Some of these questions seem to be NOID 3 situations. Are we supposed to do that form on campus and a suspension every time? Yes, if it is a NOID 3 situation, you should be completing your discontinuance web form, and then you should also be completing the appropriate EDI transaction. So whether that's a change in benefits or a full suspension or a partial suspension, just depending on your situation, it's most likely going to be either a CB where you're going from TTD to TPD immediately, or a suspension. So in those instances, you should do both of those. If you are trying to get that discontinuance web form in, or trying to get the suspension in and you're having issues, I would recommend just going ahead and doing your discontinuance web form right off the bat. That way we're going to know that you're trying to discontinue those, and that there's no sequencing with that discontinuance web form. So that will at least get it served on the employee, provide that information, and then that way if you're hung up for some reason on your suspension, everything has already been legally served and reported. We would pretty much just be waiting for the benefit information on that FX. The employee wants the narrative description on the FROI 00 to be changed. DLI has said we need to file a FROI 02, but we are getting errors that the change data element is mandatory, but the drop-down options don't include an option for changing the injury description narrative. What needs to be completed on the FROI 02 to achieve a TA by the jurisdiction for a corrective narrative description? So I think that I'm understanding that as you need to update your narratives on the FROI. In that instance, what you would actually do is you would point at your counter rather than the narrative itself. And I just want to double check and make sure that that is an acceptable change. And it looks like it is an update on an 02. So in that instance, what you would actually indicate as your change data element is data element 274, which is your number of accident injury description narrative, rather than 38, which is your actual accident injury description narrative. So hopefully that made sense, but if there's additional questions, please just follow up. Let's see here. We've been getting an error, cannot insert the value null into claim permanent impairment body part ID. We do have a body part code applied. Is there a reason we continue to get this error? Jordan, if you can send an email with the jurisdiction claim number or the claim number on your end where you're receiving that error, we can take a look and see what's happening. You can send it to the EDI team and copy myself. Can insurers send a list of claims to DLI to have SUs accepted on legacy claims? I don't know that we would accept a list. I think we could look at the list, but we have to take those kind of on a case-by-case basis. So it would require some analysis on our side to determine if that's truly the appropriate action. Nikisha, I'll have you send an email as well, just kind of explaining what the need is. On old claim petition files where a 4A00 was never filed, do we just file a 4UR instead of a 4A00? Would we just need to reach out to DLI to get the jurisdiction and employee security ID number? And do we then follow the 4UR with a short UR? So you're absolutely right, Jordan. In those instances, you would not file a 4A00. You could just reach out to us and see if we've got a 4UR and a WID for that file. We can provide that information, and you should be able to file your 4UR in that instance. If it's a situation where for some reason we don't have it, in that instance, we may have you file the 4A00 if there's not a record in our database of that file at all. But otherwise, you should be able to file that UR. You would follow that up with the short UR if it falls into those specific issues or specific scenarios that we were running through on that FAQ. So if you've already done essentially the NOPLD equivalent, one thing that is an NOPLD equivalent that you'd probably see in that instance is your answer to a claim petition. So if you've already taken kind of further action on it, that's when you would do that short UR if you need to report something else. What is required to get a successful 4UR to accept on the first transaction on a old pension claim? I received an error, corrected it, did an edit check, all is good. And then I received a totally new error. Is this a vendor issue? So I'm not sure what a pension claim is. But Terry, if you will send an example of what you're seeing so that we can look at those errors, it's a little difficult to diagnose without actually looking at those errors on our end to see what's happening. I have an EP that the employee was only paid 3 days, but I'm getting a reject as the weeks need to be filled in. Suggestions on how I can get the EP to go through. So in that instance, you should put 0 in the week. So it should be 0 weeks, 3 days, and that should clear that error up. All right, it looks like I'm to the end of the questions for now, but I will keep an eye on that chat. So the last thing I wanted to go through is our Campus Central page. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute. And for those of you who are regular attendees of these answer hours, we are kind of trying to figure out the scheduling and the cadence for these answer hours going forward. Do you all feel that this is something that you'd like to continue separate from the insurer answer hours? If you could just provide some feedback in the chat, that would be great. There's one last question in here. So I have an EP. Oh, I apologize. I have a question from one of our adjusters. The claim was open at Go Live. She served MMI on campus on 11/10, but all filings were done before Go Live. She wants to create an FN. There is a R3400 and an R314UR. Now, can she just file the FN, or does she need to create a short UR first? I would recommend doing the short UR, and the reason for that is because you may end up, if you just go with the FN, you could end up with that sequencing error regarding suite benefits that we were talking about earlier. So if your benefits are included on your FN, the system is going to say, well, you never reported these benefits, and it's going to fail that FN. So I would recommend doing that short UR if benefits had been paid. Okay. Amber, will you, I just saw your response regarding the 0 weeks. If you can send the jurisdiction claim number on that, or your claim number, we can take a look and see what error is throwing there and why that's happening. All right, so I see overwhelmingly that you guys would like to keep this answer hour going, so we will plan to keep these EDI answer hours. And we will kind of determine the timing depending on what's going on. So as far as like the release or just specific errors or anything that we're seeing, we'll try and kind of determine the timing based on that. They would be at least bi-weekly intervals. So it may be bi-weekly, maybe every 3 weeks, maybe every month. We'll just kind of determine the need as we go. So finally, just wanted to touch base on Campus Central one more time. Looks like, I apologize, I just got a question just regarding a number of transactions that haven't been, that you still haven't gotten acknowledgement since the downtime. I believe those are all processed. So if you're still not seeing those, send us an email so we can check specifically on those files for you, Janet. All right, so back to Campus Central. I apologize, lost my train of thought there for a second. So I know we go through this every time. This is where we're going to post any messages that we send. You can see we sent a couple emails to y'all yesterday. We also post our answer hour announcements here, and then all of our releases. So our releases are typically going to be done on Thursday evenings. We like to put these notes out either Friday afternoons or Monday, just kind of depending on the size of the release and how quickly we can, plain language, everything. So just a really important place to look if you accidentally delete an email that you got from us, that Gov Delivery email, those are typically going to be uploaded here as well. All right. So I think it looks like we're to the bottom of our questions. I am going to get back into my slides and give you all just an opportunity to put any last questions in there if you have them. And if not, we can give you all 15 minutes back in your day. I'm not seeing any movement right now. So I'll go ahead and call this a little bit early. Thank you all so much for participating today. It's great when we can get these questions from you because chances are that somebody else has the exact same question. So we really appreciate your participation. We will definitely keep these going. I will plan on scheduling another one in the next few weeks for you all. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.